The night my husband pushed me toward the edge of our 8th floor balcony, told me it would all be over soon, and I realized he had been laying the groundwork for weeks. The keys hit the pavement before I even registered I'd dropped them. I was standing in the parking lot of a Kroger in Mill Haven, Ohio, a town where nobody knew my face, where I'd spent 3 years learning to breathe again, and Daniel was standing 12 feet away from me between a cart return and a beat-up minivan, looking at me the way you look at something you've been searching for a long time, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. My name is Diana. At least it used to be. For 3 years, I've been Amber Cole. I have a social security number that belongs to a woman who died at 41 in a car accident in Reno. I have a driver's license, a lease, a library card. I have a cat named Harold, and a job at a dental office where I schedule appointments and file insurance claims, and nobody asks too many questions. I built that life out of terror and desperation and the blunt survival instinct of a woman who understood at 2:47 in the morning in late October that if she stayed in that apartment one more day, she would not survive to see her children grow up. I've thought about Daniel every day since I left. I've thought about Lily and Owen more than that. I've thought about what it means to be a mother who disappeared, what it means to choose your own survival when your survival means abandoning the 2 people you'd die for. I've made peace with most of it, or I'd told myself I had, and then Daniel said my name, Diana, not Amber, not hey, Diana, my real name, in his real voice, which I had not heard in 3 years, and which still lives somewhere in my body like a bruise that never fully faded. Please, just hear me out. My hands were shaking so hard my keys had gone from my grip without me noticing. I stared at him across the asphalt. He looked older. He looked tired in a way I'd never seen on him before. Daniel had always been the kind of man who radiated a particular brand of competent ease, the kind of ease that makes everyone around him feel like they're slightly behind schedule. Now he looked gaunt. The collar of his shirt was too loose. His car, a gray Accord I didn't recognize, was parked crookedly like he'd stopped in a hurry. How did you find me? The words came out barely audible. He took 1 step forward. I took 1 step back. He stopped. It took a long time, he said. But the kids? Don't, I said. He kept going anyway, like he always did. Lily asks about you every single day. Owen drew a picture of you last week. Put it on his wall. The names hit me somewhere below the sternum. Lily is 8 now. She was 5 when I left. A little girl with a gap-toothed smile and a habit of collecting smooth rocks from every place we visited, labeling each one in purple marker with where it came from. Owen is 6. He was 3 when I left. He might not remember my face at all. He might not remember my voice. He is growing up with whatever story Daniel told him, and I don't know what that story is, and that not knowing is the specific wound I carry that never closes. I left because I wanted to be alive for them someday, even if I couldn't be there right then. That was the calculation I made on a balcony 8 floors above a parking lot in Cincinnati, with a railing pressing into my spine and the night air cold against my face. That was the only math that made sense. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the very beginning, not the story of how I met Daniel at a fundraiser for the Cleveland Art Museum when I was 26 and he was 31, and he had the kind of confident, easy laugh that made you feel like you'd been funny your whole life and just hadn't had the right audience. That beginning is another story. That beginning has nothing to do with the woman standing in a Kroger parking lot with shaking hands. The beginning that matters is Lily's birth. October 14th, 6 years before I ran. I was 28. We'd been married for 2 years. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Cincinnati's Hyde Park neighborhood, a nice building with a doorman and an elevator and a view of the park, which is why Daniel had picked it. Appearances mattered to Daniel. They'd always mattered. I'd mistaken that for good taste. Lily came home from the hospital on a Tuesday. That Thursday, Daniel asked me for the password to my email account. I remember being confused. Why? He said something about coordinating with my mother, who'd been emailing him about her visit schedule, and I thought that was slightly odd, but I gave it to him. I didn't think much of it. I was 3 days postpartum and running on 2 hours of sleep and completely overwhelmed by the fact that I was now responsible for another human being. 3 weeks later, he suggested we consolidate our finances into a joint account. Married people share everything, he said. It's simpler. You won't have to track 2 accounts. You're already exhausted. Let me handle it. I was exhausted. He did seem to be handling things. I agreed. I should say here that I was not a naive person. I had a master's degree in public health. I'd worked for 4 years at a nonprofit before taking maternity leave. I had friends I loved and opinions I held. But I was also someone who had watched my parents model a very particular kind of marriage. My father made the decisions, my mother deferred, and some part of me had absorbed that model in ways I didn't fully understand until it was too late. My friend Cassie noticed before I did. We'd been friends since graduate school. She was one of those people who loved you by telling you the truth. She came to visit when Lily was 2 months old, and we sat on my kitchen floor eating takeout Thai at 11 at night because the couch was covered in laundry I hadn't folded in 6 days. And she looked at me with that very specific Cassie expression, head tilted, eyes quiet, and she said, "He goes through your phone a lot." I laughed. He was just showing me a video. "Does he always stand next to you when you're texting?" I said he was just being affectionate. She didn't push it. She wasn't that kind of person. She filed it and moved on, and I filed it differently, somewhere under things I didn't need to look at too closely, and I kept moving. By the time Owen was born, 20 months after Lily, something had shifted in a way I couldn't entirely locate. Cassie had become, in Daniel's framing, toxic. He brought her up the way you'd reference a structural problem with the house. Matter of fact, inevitable, something that needed to be managed. She's destabilizing for you. She doesn't understand what what you're going through as a mother. She's still living that single girl lifestyle, and she resents what you have. I remember defending her. At first, I told him Cassie had known me for 7 years, that she'd flown to Cincinnati twice in Lily's first year, that she was one of the most genuinely good people I knew. He'd listen, nod, say he understood. And then the next time she called, he'd be standing just close enough that I felt his attention on the conversation. And the time after that. And gradually, without any single dramatic incident I could point to, I stopped answering. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about how that happened. How you can lose a relationship that mattered enormously to you without feeling like anything was taken. How the erosion can be so patient, so incremental, that you look up one day and the whole landscape has changed and you don't remember it changing. The physical abuse started when Lily was 2 and Owen was 4 months old. It started small enough that I questioned my own perception of it. A grip on my arm during an argument that was too tight, that left a faint yellowing 3 days later. A shove in the kitchen that I told myself was accidental because he was frustrated, because we were both exhausted, because it wasn't really a shove, it was more of a push. And there was a difference. There wasn't a difference. It escalated the way these things escalate, which is slowly and then all at once. By the time Lily was 3, I had learned to map his moods from the sound of his key in the lock. I had learned which topics to avoid, which expressions of opinion were too risky, which moments were safe windows and which weren't. I'd become fluent in a language I hadn't known existed before I married him. He pushed me down the stairs in February. I remember because it was Valentine's Day weekend and there'd been a terrible freezing rain, and I hit the landing hard enough to fracture 2 ribs. He drove me to the ER himself. He held my hand in the waiting room. He told the attending physician that I'd been carrying laundry down the stairs and slipped. His voice was full of worried tenderness. The physician asked me, alone, if I needed to speak to anyone. I said no. I said I was fine. I was terrified, and I said I was fine. The week after the hospital visit, I started being more careful. A second cell phone, prepaid, purchased in cash at a Walgreens on a Tuesday when Daniel was at work and the kids were in daycare. A savings account at a bank across town that he didn't know existed, funded in small amounts, $40 here, $60 there. From cash, I skimmed off grocery runs. A bag packed in a box behind our winter coats, a change of clothes, Lily and Owen's birth certificates, my social security card, $3,000 in cash, and a folder of documents I'd put together with the help of a domestic violence hotline I'd called from the prepaid phone during my lunch hour. I had a plan. I had a date. Spring break, when his parents were coming to visit, and the house would be too full and chaotic for him to control every variable. But I wasn't careful enough. He came home late on a Wednesday night in October, 11 months before I ran, and I knew from the way the door opened that something was wrong. He didn't call out when he came in. He didn't check on the kids. He walked directly into the kitchen where I was cleaning up after dinner, and he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Not anger exactly. Something colder than anger. I can smell it from here, he said. I didn't understand at first. I said, what? The deception, he said. He'd found the bank account. I don't know how. To this day, I don't know if he'd been tracking my movements or if he'd found a statement or if someone had told him or if it was the phone. I never found out. He had the account number written on a notepad he'd pulled from his jacket pocket, and he slid it across the kitchen counter toward me. And then he took my arm the way he always did, the grip that looked like a hold but functioned like a restraint, and walked me to the balcony. I tried to stay calm. I told myself he just wants to talk. He needs to vent. Let him vent, and then you can work through this. He slid the door shut behind us. The night air in October in Cincinnati carries a particular coldness. Not arctic, not theatrical, just honest and thin. I was in socks. The concrete of the balcony was cold through the cotton. I remember those details with complete clarity. Socks. Cold concrete. The light of the city below us. 8 floors down, the parking lot, the street lights, a cab passing on the street. I know what you've been doing, he said. His voice was very quiet. I'd learned to fear the quiet voice more than the loud one. The loud voice was just sound. The quiet voice meant he'd decided something. I started to speak. He pushed me against the railing. Not violently. That was the thing. Not like someone losing control. Like someone making a measured decision. My back hit the metal, and I gripped it reflexively, and the world 8 floors below was suddenly very present. You're not leaving me, he said. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking out over the parking lot. You're not taking my kids. I made myself breathe. I said, Daniel, think about the kids. They need— I am thinking about them, he said. He turned to look at me then. He pressed his palm flat against my sternum. He pushed. They deserve better than a mother who abandoned them. I want to be precise about what happened in those seconds because I've been asked to describe it many times since, and the precision matters. He didn't lift me. He didn't swing me. He leaned his weight into his palm, and I felt the railing move against my back, or felt my weight shifting past the point where I could feel both feet fully on the floor. And I thought, this is it. This is what it is. And I understood in that moment what the past several months of him telling everyone I was depressed, I was struggling, he was so worried about me, I understood what that narrative had been for. If I went over that railing, it would look like I jumped. Then Lily called out from the bedroom, Mommy, just that word, small and sleepy, the way kids call for you from the edge of half-consciousness. His hand didn't move immediately, but something changed in his face. A fraction of a second, the tiniest loosening. That's all I needed. I'm not going to describe what happened next in specific physical detail. What I'll say is that I got past him and I got to Lily's room, and I got her back to sleep, and I spent that night in her bed with my arms around Hunter and Owen in his crib across the room, and I lay there until 4 in the morning, listening to my own heartbeat and understanding that the plan I had needed to move immediately. Not spring break, not next month, immediately. I had 6 days. I will not tell you exactly how I faked my death. I'll tell you it involved the river, that there were witnesses to a woman matching my description near the suspension bridge on a Friday evening in mid-November, and that by the time Daniel was filing a missing persons report, I was already in a gas station outside Columbus with a borrowed phone and a duffel bag, and a new identity I'd paid $3,000 for through a contact I'd found through the hotline. Her name was Amber Cole. She'd died without family, without anyone who'd notice a woman using her name. I drove west. I built a quiet life. I found the dental office in Millhaven through an ad in a local paper. I found Harold at the county shelter. I found an apartment with a landlord who accepted first and last and didn't ask too many questions. I found a therapist who knew only what I chose to tell her and who helped me learn to sleep through the night without waking up to check the locks. For 3 years, I watched the news from Cincinnati. I watched the story of my death, the searches, the vigils, the way Daniel appeared on the local news with Lily beside him, his arm around her shoulders, looking bereaved, looking like a man who had lost everything. I watched it and I made myself remember the cold concrete through my socks. And then he was standing in a Kroger parking lot in Ohio, and my keys were on the ground, and Lily's name was in my ears like a sound I'd been trying to forget. He held up his phone before I could speak. On the screen was a video, this conversation, my face. He'd been recording since before I'd seen him. The angle suggested he'd had the phone in his jacket pocket, lens facing out, and I'd walked into it without knowing. "You have 24 hours, he said. His voice was perfectly calm. The calm voice. "Come back, or I go to the police. I have the video. I have enough to get you on fraud charges for the Amber Cole identity. And Diana," he smiled. "Don't think about running. I have people watching you. I know your route." He picked up my keys and set them on the hood of my car. He walked to his Accord and drove away. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time. Harold needed to be fed at 6. I had a patient intake appointment at 8:30 tomorrow morning. The ordinary machinery of my life was still running, completely indifferent to the fact that it had just been placed under threat. I called Vera. Vera was the only person who knew the full truth. She was a domestic violence advocate I'd connected with through the hotline. She'd helped me build the exit plan, helped me find the identity, driven me 3 hours toward Columbus in her personal car. She was 53 years old and had the kind of moral clarity that some people develop from spending enough time in the company of people whose lives have been systematically dismantled. She'd been checking in on me every 2 weeks for 3 years. She'd become, I realized, the closest thing I had to a friend. "He found me," I said. "I know," she said. "He called a women's shelter in Columbus 2 weeks ago claiming to be law enforcement. I flagged it. I've been trying to reach you." I hadn't been answering. I'd been going through a particularly difficult stretch. Lily's birthday had passed 3 weeks earlier, and I'd spent 3 days not quite able to function properly. And I'd let my calls with Vera slide. I hadn't answered her last 2 messages. She said, "Listen to me. There's another option." "What option?" "We expose him first." The plan that Vera laid out over the next 40 minutes on a phone call I took in a Kroger parking lot was not the kind of plan I would have assembled on my own. It required a kind of precision I wasn't sure I was capable of in the state I was in, but I listened. I took notes on a receipt I found in my glove compartment, and when she was finished, I understood that it was the only path. I had not been idle in 3 years. I'd been collecting every news story about Daniel, every court filing, because there had been court filings, a civil suit related to a business dispute in 2022, filed by a former partner named Rick Sauer, that had produced depositions. A deposition by Daniel's assistant from 2022 in which she described, in careful professional language, an incident at the office where he had grabbed her arm when she gave him information he didn't like. She'd described the grip, the size of the bruise. She'd filed an internal complaint that had been settled and suppressed, but the deposition was public record. There were other things. Medical records. Not mine, his. A 2019 psychiatric evaluation completed during a custody dispute from his first marriage. I hadn't known about his first marriage for the first 2 years we were together. Her name was Catherine. She'd gotten out. She'd gotten out with their daughter, Mia, who was now 15, and a restraining order that had lapsed in 2018, and a settlement that required her silence, but not, and this was what Vera had discovered through a contact at a family law firm in Columbus, not her testimony in a criminal proceeding. Catherine had agreed to talk. She'd been waiting, Vera told me, for someone to ask. The exposure strategy required me to surface before Daniel's 24 hours expired. It required me to go to the police myself, not as a fugitive, as a victim. It required me to walk into the Millhaven Police Department the following morning and make a formal report about Daniel's appearance in the parking lot, the recording, the threat, the statement about having people watching me. It required me to bring the documents I'd been quietly compiling, and it required a call to a journalist. The journalist's name was Patricia Ocon. She wrote for a regional outlet that covered courts and criminal justice issues, and Vera had spoken to her twice already, off the record. Patricia had been waiting for me. I drove home. I fed Harold. I sat at my kitchen table and sorted through 3 years of collected evidence. I organized it into a folder. I was still shaking. I was shaking through most of that night, but my hands moved and my mind moved, and somewhere around midnight, I understood that the shaking was fear doing its job. Fear was keeping me from making mistakes. Fear was the correct response to this situation. I didn't need to stop being afraid. I needed to act while I was afraid. I went to the Millhaven police station at 8 o'clock the following morning. A detective named Ray Solano took my report. He was a quiet man, late 40s, who wrote in a small notebook and did not react visibly to anything I told him, which I found steadying. I told him everything. I placed the folder on his desk. He looked through it for a long time without speaking. He said, "The woman in Columbus, Catherine, has she given a written statement?" "She was prepared to," I said. He looked at the deposition from Daniel's assistant. He looked at the psychiatric evaluation. He said, "This is a lot of documentation for someone who's been living under a different name." I said, "I've had a lot of time." He gave me a card and told me he'd be in contact. I left and drove to the dental office and worked my 8:30 intake and my 9:15 Crown prep, and I did not tell my coworker Megan anything unusual when she asked how I was doing. I said I was tired. She said she was too. The next 72 hours were among the strangest of my life. Daniel sent no further contact. Either he was watching and waiting or he'd miscalculated, assumed his 24-hour ultimatum would trigger immediate compliance, the way his ultimatums always had. He'd built his control on my isolation, on my belief that I had no recourse. He didn't know I'd spent 3 years building a different set of facts. On the third day, Vera called to tell me that Detective Solano had contacted the Hamilton County Prosecutor's Office. Catherine had given her written statement. The assistant from the deposition had agreed to speak to the prosecutor's investigator. There was a possibility, not a certainty, but a possibility, of charges. Patricia Ocon's story ran 4 days later. It was careful, sourced, and devastating. It did not use my real name. It identified Daniel by name. It detailed the staircase incident, the balcony incident, the prior marriage, the assistant's testimony. It laid out the pattern without editorializing. It didn't need to editorialize. His mother called me 2 days after the story ran. I'd expected anger. She cried. She said she'd known something was wrong for years and hadn't understood how to name it, and she was sorry. She was so sorry. She asked about Lily and Owen. I told her I'd been in contact with a family lawyer. I told her I was coming home, not to Cincinnati, not yet, but closer. I was going to fight for my children. I was going to do it in the open, with a name and a face, and every piece of documentation I'd spent 3 years quietly building. Daniel was arrested 6 weeks later. Charges included domestic violence, criminal coercion, and fraud. The fraud related to a life insurance claim he'd filed on my behalf 3 months after my supposed death. I hadn't known about the insurance policy. Vera's contact at the law firm had found it. $140,000. He'd collected it. He'd spent it. The custody case is ongoing. I have a family lawyer named Denise who has the kind of precise, unhurried intelligence that makes you understand why some people become attorneys. She believes the case is strong. I believe her. I'm learning to believe things again, slowly, the way you learn to put weight on an injury that's mostly healed. I live in Cleveland now. I kept the name Amber for almost 3 months after everything broke open. I'd become attached to it, I think, the way you become attached to the self that kept you safe, but I eventually made the transition back. I am Diana again, Diana Pierce, which is my maiden name. I am 35 years old. I have a cat named Harold who adjusted to the new apartment with remarkable equanimity. I've seen Lily 3 times under supervised visitation. She is 8 years old and she still collects smooth rocks. She showed me a purple amethyst she'd found at a shop at the zoo. She held it out in her palm the way she used to when she was very small, and she said, "I knew you didn't jump." I didn't know how to answer that. I said, "You're right, I didn't." She put the rock in my hand. She closed my fingers around it. She went back to looking at the gorillas. Owen is cautious with me in the way that 6-year-olds are cautious with people they're not sure about. He watches. He sits close, but not touching. At our second visit, he brought a drawing, a house, 2 stick figures, a son, a dog, though we'd never had a dog, and he said, "This is my family." I asked him who the people were. He pointed, "That's me, that's Lily." I asked about the son. He thought about it. He said, "That's you. You're the one that's far away." I kept that drawing. It's on my refrigerator. I look at it every morning. The question I get asked most often, by Vera, by Denise, by my therapist, by the few people who now know the full story, is whether I regret the way I left, whether I would have done something differently. The honest answer is, I don't know. I know that I survived. I know that my children are alive and relatively intact, and that they will have a mother to grow up with, even if the early years are complicated, and the supervised visitation is a particular kind of grief all its own. I know that I could not have predicted whether leaving another way, a shelter, an immediate divorce filing, a restraining order, would have kept me alive long enough to get there. I know what Daniel is capable of. I knew it on a balcony in October with my back against a railing. What I've come to understand is that survival is not a clean thing. It leaves marks. It requires choices that compound on each other in ways you can't anticipate. I disappeared from my children's lives, and they grew up with an absence where I should have been, and that is a loss that is real and specific and mine to carry. Lily's rock collection, Owen's cautious watching, the years I didn't see. Something real was lost. I know that. I will spend the rest of my life knowing it, but I am here. I am Diana Pierce, and I am 35 years old, and I am fighting for my children with every document and testimony and careful legal argument Denise and I can put together. I am sitting in supervised visitation rooms watching my daughter hold out a purple amethyst in her palm and choosing to believe that forward is the direction that matters now. He told me it would all be over soon. He was right about one thing. It is, just not for me.